So now we'll see the table component. This is a table component, right? This is a table component, and this table component has a table head, and the table data, all this student information is there in the database. So basically, we need to collect this information from the database, right? So both this form component and table component are called from the app component, right? So when you call this info table component, right, to display this data, we have to pass this data, right? So before calling the component, we need to collect this data from the database. So let's see how we are doing that. Okay, so in our app component, there is a use effect. There's a use effect. So use effect has two arguments. One is a function and next is the dependency. In the dependency, we didn't specify anything. It's an empty dependency. So this use effect function will be called only on the first render. Okay, so when the first render happens, we are calling this getAll function, and in the getAll function, we are sending a get request to a server, and in the response, we get the complete data, right? And we are setting a state variable. Okay, set data state variable, set data function sets this all student data state variable. So when the component is called, we are first setting this data in the state variable. So all the data will come to the state variable, and for the info table component, we can pass this state variable so that the info table component can display the data. Okay, so in the info table component, we are passing the state variable, and in the info table component, simple thing, this is the table head, and the data, right? We have to loop this data, what we are passing is an array. So we have to loop around all the data and we have to display this, right? And we have to display a couple of edit and delete buttons. Okay, so let's see how we are doing that in the info table component. So info table component, first we display the table head, and in the table body, if the length is greater than 0, I'm calling the map function to loop around all the student data. So while calling the map function, we have to call like array.map function, right? So we pass the student data in the props, right? So student data is passed in the props. So props.student data will give you the array of students, right? So always when you call the map function, we have to call array.map, and the argument to a map function is a function. Okay, this is nothing but a function, right? This is a function. So this function will be called for each element in the array in the student data. So each element, we are filling each element details in the table data. Along with that, we are filling two buttons. One is the edit button and one is the delete button. So when edit button is clicked, this edit data function will be called. When delete button is clicked, this delete data function will be called. This is how all data is getting displayed here. Okay. So now when I click the edit button, what happens? Edit data function is called. Okay. Now let's see what is happening when I click the edit button. When I click the edit button, this data, it is coming here, right? It is coming to this form, right? And then let's say I'm changing I'm adding M to that. I'm clicking update. Okay. And it is getting updated in the database, right? So how this will happen? This edit button is there in the info table component. So this data, right, it has to go to the info form component, right? It's coming here. So what I'm going to do is, this data I'm going to pass to the app component, and in the app component, I'm going to set a state variable with all this data. And from the app component, I'm going to call the info form component with this data. So this data from info table is going to go to app component. From app component, it has to come back to the info form component, right? And that is how I'm going to get this data here, right? In the input tag, right? That is one input element. There is one attribute called value. In the value, if you specify this data, it will get displayed here, and that is what I'm going to use. So when edit button is clicked, I'm calling edit data. So edit data is so this is table. Edit data is edit student data. So the edit student data, I'm just getting the data. I'm setting the state variable set edit data, which is the edit student info. So whatever data I clicked here, right, edit, this data is set in this state variable, and this state variable edit student info is passed to the info form component in the AC set edit info props. In the info form component, what I'm doing is there is a use effect. If the set edit data info is not null, I am setting the state variable with whatever data I got. In the props, I'm getting the edit info, right? I'm setting all the state variables, right? And I'm also setting this is the edit data, right? So the edit variable also is set to true. Okay, so once this is set, right, the state variable is set, and when you display this form, right, the value this variable, the state variable will be valid. Okay, so we have specified the state variable in the value attribute, and since we have specified like that, that is how when you click edit, this data is coming here because of the value attribute. And when I click update, right, when I click update, this info summit will be called, and in the info summit, this edit will be true. So I am calling the create data, the edit will be true, and I also passing the ID. I am calling this create data function from the info form, right? So in the create data, right, which is create student, now I have to update, right? So this edit is true. So I'm calling the put request with this endpoint. I'm passing the data. Okay, so now that is how I'm updating the database. Once the database is updated, I'm calling the get all function, which gets the information and updates the or original state variable. And this state variable is again passed to the info table component, and that is how a new table is new information is displayed. Okay, when I click the delete function, the same thing happens. Okay, in the table component, when I click the delete function, delete data is called. This delete data calls a delete student. Okay, so when I click this, I'm seeing a pop-up here. I'm sending a pop-up, like whether we have to delete or not. So when I click this delete, the pop-up comes, or you sure you have to delete, right? If I click OK, that particular entry is getting deleted. How it happens? I'm sending a delete request. So when I send a delete request, right, I'm passing a variable here, right? So I have to put it in single quotes, not double quotes, right? Single black slash quotes, which is to the left side of one in your keyboard, right? You have to use that. Okay, and then in the response, right, you have deleted an entry. Again, you have to update the state variable. So again, I'm calling the get all function to update the state variable with the new data. So when the new data is updated in the state variable, the component will re-render, and the info table component, the new data will be passed, and the info table component displays only the data, new data. Right? This is how the complete application works.